What statistically improbable thing happened to you? Story 1. My friend, who had two sets of monochorionic and monoamniotic twins, the rarest kind of twins, in back-to-back pregnancies. Identical twins share the same amniotic sac and the same placenta. Mono-mono, or momo, twins happen in about 1% of identical twin pregnancies, and less than 0.1% of all pregnancies. This is incredible, and the most statistically unlikely thing on this list. In my opinion, I have identical twins. They're MODI though, and the science behind twins, especially ID twins, as they are seemingly a glitch, has fascinated me ever since I fell pregnant with them. I have Momo identical mirror twins. They had birthmarks on opposite sides of their faces when they were born that have faded. One is left-handed, one is right-handed. The lefty had appendicitis and it was on the correct side. The righty hasn't had any surgeries or chest x-rays that I can recall at the moment. Sheesh, what's in the water there? Story 2. I underwent a surgical procedure called a stapendectomy to improve the significant hearing loss in my good ear. Instead, I ended up completely deaf. My surgical ENT said this has only happened to 5 patients in the US. He was doing research to try and help me afterward. I don't know how true it is, but hey, lucky me. My dad had his retinas spontaneously detached. One popped off completely and the other was in the process. The surgeon told him not to worry because 100% of all his retina reattachments had been successful. The one that was in the process of detaching was fine, but after like 3 or 4 surgeries of the one that came all the way off, it kept popping back off, and then the surgeon was just like, sorry bro. God, hearing stuff sucks. I had hearing loss in my ear that was continuously misdiagnosed as an ear infection after I started scuba diving. Finally got a hearing test and saw a doc who confirmed nerve damage and hearing loss. As we were leaving, the doc pulled my mom aside, not me, and said she's only heard of it in med school, never seen it in real life, but was concerned it was a paralymphatic fistula, and suggested we rule that out. Said if it is, it's a need to be seen by a hearing specialist yesterday type of emergency. Hours later, I'm getting a CAT scan of my brain with an appointment with a specialist, who books months out, 2 hours away for the following day. Turns out she was right. Thankfully, the fistula had healed itself on its own, so I didn't need surgery, but that was another weird aspect of an already super rare medical issue. I did elect to have steroid injections into my eardrum. It was as awful as it sounds, in an attempt to bring my hearing back, but that did not work. To this day, I have no real explanation or reason why that happened, or why I couldn't equalize properly when scuba diving, but also no explanation for why I felt no pain. Yikes, that's some really bad luck there. Story 3. Husband and I visited our old hometown and went to a used bookstore we used to frequent. I picked up a familiar title in nostalgia and flipped it open to find a school student's ID card. The name and photo on the ID? My husband. Turns out his mom had donated books to that store many years before we all moved away from that area. He must have been using it as a bookmark and had forgotten. It's not so surprising considering we used to live in that area, but the ID was nearly 10 years old by the time we found it. That book was sitting on the shelf for nearly a decade untouched, waiting for me to come along and pick it up. Bizarre. A friend of mine, A, had a signed copy of a book from his favorite author. While he was at university, his mother asked him if she could donate his books and he said okay. He had forgotten that the book was in his room. He thought he had it with him at school. When he realized his mistake, the book was long gone. More than 20 years later, another friend, B, was in Japan. He was in a cafe that had a book exchange. He picked up a book that had an inscription. It was dedicated to someone with the same first name as our friend who had lost his inscribed book. B decided to buy it for A, not knowing that A had lost an inscribed book from the now dead author. B sent the book to A in the US. A was quite surprised to get a package from B who he hadn't heard from in years. He was even more surprised when it was the exact same book his mother had donated. It was still in pretty good condition and even had notes in his handwriting in the margins that he didn't remember making. This reminded me of when we moved out of our family home that my parents had lived in for about 25 years. We'd already moved out and the new owners had moved in, but about a week later my mom remembered that she left some old photo albums in the attic. She obviously went back to collect them, and when we were looking through them she realized that a young boy in a few photos of family friends was actually the new owner of our old home. I still find it funny that before moving any of his possessions into the new home, there were already photographs of this man as a child child in his house. Coincidence? I think not. Story 4. Not me, but a friend. He was a merchant mariner, lived here in Virginia Beach. He was always calling and texting, posting pics from around the world. One time, he'd been out a while, and we knew he was heading to Dubai, but didn't know where he'd be after that. 4 months go by, and nobody's heard from him. His neighbor, who I was friends with, gets married and goes to Thailand for his honeymoon. He texted me one day and said, "You aren't going to believe this." He said he asked a local where a good local spot to eat was that tourists wouldn't be at. Guy takes him 30 minutes from the beach to some dive bar / restaurant with no sign and no clearly marked entrance. He said it looked so shady he was afraid he was about to be robbed and killed. He goes in and it's a legitimate restaurant. He eats, drinks, has some beers, and goes to the bathroom. Out walks my friend. So he took a pic and sent it to me to confirm he's okay. Imagine taking a flight several thousands of miles away, getting away from the tourist areas, and going into a local dive bar and running into your next door neighbor you haven't seen in months. Friend of mine, American, was visiting New Zealand. She wasn't in a big city, a random small town that I've never heard of and probably couldn't even pronounce. She went to a hole-in-the-wall restaurant and was seated at a table directly next to her ex, who she hadn't seen or talked to in several years. She said they never discussed visiting New Zealand and she just went on a whim with a friend. I don't know about you, but if I was that guy's neighbor, I would probably think he's stalking me. Story 5. Not an exciting life or death incident, but something rather sweet. I took care of my late father for the final 2 years of his life. He had Alzheimer's and pulmonary fibrosis, among other issues, so we had a lot more bad days than good. In the summer of 2019, I took my dad out for our date, one day to a historic old drugstore that has phenomenal milkshakes, one of his favorite foods in the world. It was one of Dad's increasingly rare good days, where he chatted merrily with me about all sorts of old memories. I felt like I had my dad's former self back for just a little while. We had such a wonderful time that I intended to take him there again soon. However, this ended up being our last date. For most of the remainder of that year, Dad declined too much, mentally and physically, for me to take him out or anything other than very short grocery trips or to appointments. The following year, enter the pandemic. It was a very, very rough year with Dad. In January of 2021, my father died, alone in a hospital in another state. Our state ran out of hospital beds and he had suffered a traumatic fall that required hospitalization. That day in 2019 ended up being the last truly happy day I had with my dad and the last fun outing he ever got to experience. 3 months after my dad died, I met a wonderful man online, 9 days after signing up for a 1-year membership, because surely it's going to take time to find someone truly compatible with my shy nerd self like me. A few months later, we decided to try a first date. He lived 3 hours away but wanted me to be comfortable, so he volunteered to drive to my town for the date. He looked online for an appealing restaurant to suggest, and excitedly told me about this really neat historic drugstore that we could go to. We went on a very crowded day, local festival, oops, and had to wait quite a while for a table. The waitress sat us at the exact same table where I sat with my dad nearly 2 years earlier. I was even in the same seat. 3 months later, we got engaged at that drugstore. So the beginning of the end of one chapter of my life crossed paths with the beginning of the best, so far, chapters. My husband and I have since decided to make a trip back there at least once a year. Dad really would have loved my husband. This reminds me of a simpler tale, not nearly as incredible, kinda sweet, and heads up, super sad. Years ago, I was talking with my now late husband about rainbows. I was astonished to hear that he'd never seen a full ground-to-ground rainbow in his entire life. Just a few short months later, I got the call no one wanted. The local trauma center telling me hubby was in a collision and I had to hoof it over there. Can't tell me what condition he was in, but I need to get there real quick. I got a bit lost but made it, and while walking across the parking garage to the elevator, I saw one big, fat double rainbow stretching from horizon to horizon. Those things were huge. I just knew right then and there that he was gone, and when I got to the CPR, they were doing CPR, but never were able to get a rhythm back, and he was gone. This was really sweet. I also lost my dad to Alzheimer's just last October, but he started severely declining during COVID, and we had to put him in a facility as it was no longer safe for him to live at home. I took him out for lunch at his favorite deli one day and had no idea that would be our last date, on December 31st, 2019. During the pandemic, I also met someone and we're getting married this fall. He never met my dad, but they would have loved each other. They're very similar, and I know my dad is happy I found someone who's just as much a gentleman as he was. Maybe that was their dad's message that he would always be there for them. Story 6. Riding my bicycle on a commercial fishing pier as a kid, I lost control and rode off the edge with a 20-foot drop to exposed rocks at low tide. I tried to stop myself from going over by planting my feet on the edge of the pier, but I knew my bike was too heavy. Somehow, the bike stopped halfway over at a 45-degree angle. However, now the seat was in the small of my back, preventing me from getting off, and I couldn't budge at all to get the bike back up. A fisherman finally ran over to help me, and we decided he would pull me as hard as he could and I'd let the bike fall. I jumped to the side as he pulled me back to the pier, and it worked. However, my bike was still there, not moving at all. When I examined what had happened, there was a piece of rebar sticking out from the edge of the pier, bent upwards in an L shape, and it passed diagonally through the spokes of my front tire and completely wedged my bike in place. It was the only spot on the 300-foot-long pier with anything sticking out. I most certainly did not stop myself and my bike from going over. We live at the top of a steep hill with properties surrounding below. Was riding my bike and found a downwards facing driveway, and I thought I could go down it and turn quickly enough before hitting the shrub at the end. Anyways, my brakes had loosened and were no longer working. Down I went. The shrub suddenly looks very weak as I get closer and realize this is a hanging brush from a tree planted in the property below. 10 to 15 meter drop into a property with a deck that's under construction and an empty pool. I go off the ledge up into the air. Me and the bike do a full 360 spin before landing upright in the pool, with the pool's curve catching the bike and allowing for a nice delivery. Winded, I ran all the way home, and fair to say I haven't ridden a bike since. Roughly aged 9 or 10, lol. Not nearly the same degree of improbability, but I was once walking on the sidewalk of a bridge over the interstate on my way to 7-Eleven. There is an exit ramp off the interstate leading to a left turn onto the bridge I was walking across. As usual, I had my earbuds in and couldn't hear any outside noise. They are the kind with rubber tips that create a perfect seal, and I had them turned up as loud as I could to block out the road noise. As I was about halfway across the bridge, I happened to look up behind me and notice one of those long white church vans speeding out of control like it was going to run up on the sidewalk. Luckily, the sidewalk was quite wide, so I was able to jump out of the way a split second before the van hopped the curb and dove onto the sidewalk. I'm not sure if the driver fell asleep or what, but the route it took and the way he was accelerating looked like he had just decided to run me over or something. It was totally bizarre. After he missed me, he drove to the end of the bridge on the sidewalk and came to a stop, then paused for about 5 seconds before driving away. If I had looked up even 2 seconds later, the guy would have run me right over going about 40 miles per hour. Now that was one strong piece of rebar. Story 7. Back in community college, people thought I was dead for half a day. I was supposed to meet a friend on campus to go eat. I was running late because my dad wanted me to do something before I left. I don't remember what. I get to campus and there's this fountain, the kind that you can walk through or run about and avoid sprays of water. Around the whole fountain is a bunch of police tape. So I think, okay, weird. And then I go to the building where my friends hang out. As I walk in behind one of them, I hear them telling everyone else I killed myself that morning. Turns out that a guy matching my physical description killed himself in the fountain. Between that and what he'd said to someone before doing it, along with my appalling lack of punctuality, everyone thought it was me. I always thought the Mark Twain quote of, "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated," was badass, but I had never thought I'd have the opportunity to use it. I had a situation where someone thought I tried to unalive myself. I was in a Final Fantasy X online chat, so you can guess how long ago this was, and I forget the circumstances circumstances or how we got to the topic of depression and self-harm, and people in the chat were basically having this cathartic session talking about attempts and SH and how they managed to pull themselves out of their funks. It was great, insightful chat, and really emotional at times. I shared my experiences too, including an, at the time, recent bout of severe depression that included an attempt in finally seeking help. Well, I guess someone didn't read all of the messages or something. I don't know. So I left the chat since I had some homework to wrap up for class the next day, then I went to bed. Around 3 a.m., the cops are pounding on my door, freaking my mom out. She answers the door, then comes into my room, shakes me awake, is relieved when I wake up hella confused, and tells me there's a cop in the hallway wanting to talk to me. Sleepy, panicked, and confused, this cop is checking my arms, asking me questions about my mental state, and I'm like, dude, WTF? They determine I'm okay and leave. My mom is screaming at me when they leave, asking me why I so desperately want to die, and I'm like, but I don't. What the fuck? She finally goes back to bed after all of the above, and I'm wide awake at this point, so I figured I should just finish the essay I was working on. I go on my computer and I see the FFX chat is lit up talking about me and praying for my soul because someone thought I was going to unalive myself, not realizing the whole chat collectively discussed past issues. This person tracked down where I lived, called 911, and had them do a wellness check. It was wild. I privately messaged this person and blasted them. I was 18 at the time, so that was probably immature of me. Then I completely left the chat because I was embarrassed and didn't want to be a problem. The next day, my parents took my computer and put it where they could watch me at all times. I have a slightly similar story. In 1982, I was a senior in high school, and my school also thought I was dead for about half a day. The blood donation crew from the Red Cross was at our school for the day, and any juniors with parental consent, seniors and teachers were encouraged to donate blood. I wanted to donate. I always wanted to, so I did, and that was how I found out I was anemic. Enough so that I conked out and was on a cot for hours. The school nurse and a doctor checked me, and we determined that I was okay and would be fine if I just rested, preferably at home. They called my mom and stepdad, and neither of them was willing to leave work since I was in no real danger. So my stepdad came to get me at the end of the day, and by then I was weak but basically fine. However, in the hours before that, I was just laying there on the cot and more students were donating blood themselves, and they saw me lying there pale, unconscious, and just assumed that I had died while donating, because of course the school would just leave a dead student laying there out in the open for everyone to see. So unbeknownst to me, a rumor quickly spread all over the school that I had died while donating blood. After my stepdad got me home, we walked into the house and the phone was ringing off the hook. I answered and it was my best friend practically screaming, "Oh my god, you're alive? You're okay?" She then explained to me that because I had laid there for hours looking pretty much dead, the rumor took shape over the school. And yes, the next day as I walked through the halls to my classes, there were a lot of shocked faces and "Holy crap, I thought she was dead!" exclamations to greet me. Talk about a missed opportunity to fake your own death. Story 8. Nearly getting killed by the same reckless/drunk driver twice in 3 years. The first time in 2001, I turned out right. Before I completed the turn, a Pontiac Sunfire zipped by going 100 to 110 miles per hour. The second near death was in the driveway in 2004. I was supposed to pick up my brother from work. This time, I didn't. Instead, I hear a noise that could be heard a block away. The drunk driver smashed my car and turned it around 180 degrees. His blood alcohol content was 0.20. He tried running away and the neighbor tackled him. There happened to be a police officer nearby too. Life comes at you fast. I played softball with a kid when I was 11 years old. Drunk drivers don't want their license. My cousin was killed Christmas 2021 sitting at a red light by a guy hitting him from behind at 60. The guy had 3 DUIs. Why was that guy allowed to still be turning an ignition key without a breathalyzer? He was a great guy who made it a better world. Taken out by a guy with a proven record of making it a worse world. I had a similar experience at a far fewer miles per hour. I was maybe 19 and decided to do an extra loop in the Walmart parking lot of my former small town, 10,000 people or so at the time, while waiting on my mom. Girl 2 grades below me backed into my car from her parking spot without looking. 1 year later, I borrowed my parents' car to go to a job interview as mine needed repairs. Since I wasn't familiar with the other side of town, I lived in a town of 250 150, but we worked, attended school, etc. in the larger town, and cell phones were rare and without navigation. I missed the main road I'd meant to take, but thought the next road a few blocks down would be just as good. It wasn't. The very same chick driving one of those 80s cars that could pass for an armored vehicle nowadays, and per the police, highly drugged up, came tearing through the stop sign at about 60 or more on a 25 miles per hour residential street. I knew she was going to T-bone me from the passenger side, and possibly flip my car or kill me. This had just happened to two former classmates not long before, which was going the speed limit, so all I could do in that split second was turn my wheel away in an attempt to take a lesser hit. This pushed my car up the steep embankment and into the corner utility pole, which bent over my car and knocked out the power for that area. Dazed, I remember hearing yelling, panic screaming to get out of there before the cops arrived, then an ambulance. I had blood on the airbag. The car was completely trashed, and when they helped me get out, I could see her car virtually unscathed. The passenger and driver's side door both left open, and per the cops, they fled the scene. Able to stand after I got my bearings, I refused transport to the hospital as my mother was a registered nurse, and I already felt horrible that I'd have to tell her about her car. I should have gone. I have a permanent V in my neck, pain issues, etc., but it didn't hit me right away. Per the police, her license was revoked and they could just never seem to catch her. That was 21 or so years ago. Flash forward to last year, my husband was taking too long in the bathroom after a drive across the state, when I thought I'd catch up on the local happenings from my old town in my old home state. The same chick had yet again been arrested the day prior for driving on a revoked license. And this, kids, is why you do not drink while driving. Story 9. Took a summertime organic chemistry class, 1 month of classes 5 days a week, then a 3-week break, then another month for the second semester. After the break, I reached into the box in my closet to grab the textbook where I had hidden it and felt a sharp stab in the corner of my little finger at the cuticle of the nail bed. I was running late to class, so I thought nothing of it. I became ill with profuse sweating and nausea during the day, then violently ill into the night with vomiting and diarrhea. Went to the ER the next morning and they ran every test they could. 2 days later, I started having trouble breathing and went to the ER again. My heart was swollen up half again to its normal size. My lungs were swollen and my kidneys too. Doctors kept me for 2 days with batteries of tests, and after 2 days let me go as everything was going back to normal. Then I began pooping what appeared to be a white paste, and this went on for 2 days, at the end of which I noticed that my tongue and the lining of my mouth were almost purple in color, and I had a red streak from the tip of my little finger that during the day extended up to my bicep by that evening. Went back to the ER and the doctor said that he had no clue, but maybe I had been bitten by something venomous. I then thought about the day that the symptoms started and went into that box in my closet, and sure enough there was a little black spider in the box. I asked one of my professors about it and he told me the county health department had an etymology office not far from the campus, so I captured the little spider and went on over. The doctor there told me it was just a grass spider and there was absolutely no way it could have envenomated me for 3 reasons. He said they have curved mandibles, so they can't hit the human skin. They have soft mandibles, so even when they manage to strike the skin, the mandible will turn and not break the surface. But most importantly, their venom, which digests the proteins that stretch between the cell walls of animals, gets bound to platelets in the human bloodstream and is almost instantly neutralized. I showed him where the bite was as evidence by the red streak, and sure enough, it was in the corner of the nail bed in the very soft tissue of the cuticle where the spider could actually get a strike. He asked if I had some kind of platelet disorder. I made a quick call to the cancer research hospital I worked at in the evenings at that time, and sure enough, I had donated platelets the evening before being bitten. A process where they put you on a platelet machine and extract almost all of your platelets for donation to kids who are in need of them due to having low counts from the chemotherapy. It was at this point that the entomologist started hyperventilating and asking all kinds of questions. He was low-key freaking out. He kept repeating that this was a billion to 1 event. He'd never heard of it before. He ended up getting me to sign some papers so that he could have my medical records and published a paper on it. Fun for him, but not so much for me. The white paste that I pooped for 3 days was the lining of my entire digestive tract, which came out as white pasty-looking individual cells. By the end of the month, everything was back to normal like none of it had ever happened. Interesting side note, when some spiders inject their victims venoms and turn them into a liquid they can then drink. This venom dissolves the proteins that hold cells together by running between the cell walls. These proteins are the only things binding the cells together. Without these proteins, we would be reduced to a nasty white, almost liquidy paste. Edit: as it has been asked many times in the comments, I do not possess a copy or link to the paper the etymologist wrote, nor do I remember which journal it was in. This happened in the early 90s and may have never even been out on the internet. Also, I don't know if that journal even still exists. Can't be that many people reading journals on entomology. Also, he was a PhD in entomology and not a medical doctor, so it wasn't a medical journal. Instead of getting spidey senses, he just got alien diarrhea. Yikes. Story 10. While attempting to get medical treatment, the doctor's office ran a pharmacy report on my medical history and prescriptions. My terminally ill brother, whose full name was only 2 letters different from mine, and we had the same address and phone number, was on a boatload of narcotics at the time, and through their search they pulled up a hospital information system report and thought it was mine. They yelled at me and kicked me out of the office, saying I was just looking for drugs. I was mortified and very upset, and they wouldn't listen to me when I said it was my brother and not me. I ended up calling the pharmacy board, and they called the doctor and explained that since we had the same address, phone number, and an extremely similar name, they had to search by the social security number. The doctor felt horrible and gave me free treatment, and now he tells that story at conferences he goes to. It was crazy. So of course I had something happen to me that the doctors or nurses had never come across before. The doctor shared with me the tales of the conferences he spoke at, and said none of the doctors there knew it was possible for data from 2 people to be included in the same pharmacy report either. I guess they do now. I once got called in to help figure out what was going on with some patient records. It turns out that 2 people in the same small suburb had the exact same date of birth and name and had been admitted to the hospital on the exact same day. They had never met each other despite immigrating from the same country, and their name was fairly unusual in their home county. That's exactly why you should never give your kid a common name. Story 11. Not me, but my grandfather. Weeks before his 93rd birthday, he was finishing a day of yard work on his farm. He tripped while getting off the lawnmower and it rolled on top of him. Blades turned off, luckily. He was pinned under it long enough that he was able to slit his own throat to put himself out of his misery, as opposed to freezing to death overnight beneath a lawnmower. Just before he tried to end himself, he happened to see a crowbar in the yard that he had dropped earlier. It was just in his reach, and he grabbed it. He proceeded to somehow lift the lawnmower off of himself with it, slide himself out from beneath the mower, crawl back onto the mower with broken limbs, ride the mower up to the house, crawl up the stairs, and grab his phone to call my dad. "I need a ride to the hospital. I think I hurt myself." The mower was a riding zero-turn style mower, worth a Google if you aren't familiar. It rolled on its wheels on top of him as he stepped off of its platform. With gas and the machine combined, it weighed just under 600 pounds. He survived this incident, but unfortunately it led him down a domino effect of events that led to his death this year. I have a family friend whose grandfather died almost the same way. He was on a regular mower and hit a tree root and it tipped the whole thing over. Somehow, it ended up slicing his jugular and he bled out from the time it took my friend to hear the noise, run the 100 yards from his house, and get to his grandfather. He fell on his butt because the grass had so much of his blood on it. Crazy world we live in. For a second there, I thought you might be related to me, but my granddad did it in his 50s. Similar story, we lived on a highway with a really deep ditch out front that usually had a foot or two of water rushing by all the time. He was cutting grass too close to it on the riding mower. It flipped over with him under it while it's still running. He managed to push it off and came into the house with me and my mom and asked us to take him to the hospital. He broke his thumb and had some pretty gnarly cuts and bruises. This is the man who ran over steel-toed boots with a regular lawnmower and cut off his big toe's toenail while my mom was a kid and had to get a skin graft from his butt. Us grandkids called it his butt toe for a long time. Now that got super dark real quick. Story 12. My friend was going to Ireland to visit her extended family for the first time and invited me along. We had a great time meeting her aunts and uncles, seeing the beautiful sights, etc. On our last night in Ireland, the family all got together for dinner, some rousing laughs and a general awesome time. Her cousin had been traveling that week and was only in town for one night, and so she and her boyfriend swung by to say hi and bye. They left for the airport in NYC and we went to sleep, getting up at 4 a.m. to catch our own flight to NYC. 2 days later, I had to be in NYC for a job interview. I wasn't familiar with the Wall Street area, so I went extra early just in case. I couldn't find it, but as luck would have it, I found it with no problem and had 40 minutes to kill. I had no idea what to do, considered getting food, but didn't want to risk staining my clothes or having an upset stomach or anything, so I wandered around a little until I stumbled onto the Barnes & Noble bookstore. Thinking this was perfect, I went in and walked slowly through the store looking for somewhere to sit. There weren't any sort of private spaces on the floor, so I found the escalator and started heading up. As I approached the halfway mark, I see a young couple going down the escalator. As our eyes meet, we recognize each other, and at the exact same time we both meet halfway up or down, we point to each other and turn as we pass each other, mouths open in shock. My friend's cousin and her boyfriend. 2 nights ago, I met them for the first time and we had been laughing and sharing food and wine in her aunt's house in Ireland. And now here we are, crossing paths exactly halfway on the escalator. A moment sooner or later and we would have completely missed each other. She quickly came back up the escalator and we chatted about how crazy this coincidence was. I nailed the job interview too because I just felt this surge of right time, right placeness that meant I was supposed to be there. I was so full of confidence and optimism, I made the whole panel of interviewers laugh and talk comfortably with me and got the job. Talk about a crazy coincidence. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and make sure to subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again and see you next time.